Thank you all for joining today. Today's webinar is Financial Planning in Unique Circumstances. And our guest speaker is Cortney Heykoop. She is a special needs mom and financial advisor. She opened up her own firm, Clover Leaf Wealth Strategies, 6 years ago, with a focus on serving families impacted by disability. Cortney loves working with families like hers. She not only brings a breadth of financial wealth, but a comprehensive, holistic approach that includes helping families navigate the complexities of governmental resources, disability planning, estate planning, and of course, their financial plan. Cortney speaks nationally to help educate other financial advisors, families, and organizations. She currently serves on the board of the Arc of Loudoun as secretary and works closely with numerous nonprofits sponsoring events, providing pro bono services and educational seminars. Welcome. And just to note that we are recording. Closed captioning is at the bottom of your screen. And should you have any questions or comments or technical difficulties, please put them in the chat. Thank you.
Hello, all. Thank you very much for having me. I am very, very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you today and hopefully answer some of those pressing questions of how do I plan for my future and how do I plan for my child's future throughout their lifetime, especially in their adulthood. So, that was a wonderful intro. Thank you. I am a special needs mom. My Lily is here on this screen. She's now 20. Today she doesn't feel as cute as she looks in that picture. But most days she is pretty darn cute either way. I have converged my personal life and my professional life around the mission of helping families like mine, because I just think that there's so many variables and unique circumstances that we have to plan for that traditional financial planning just doesn't meet all of our needs. So we're going to get started today and talk about some of that and hopefully answer a bunch of your questions. All righty, there we go. Today is an informational seminar. I am not here to sell anything. I am a licensed fiduciary and an independent advisor with Osaic Wealth. That's my broker-dealer. But I'm not an accountant and I'm not an attorney. So a lot of what we do talk about in financial planning bleeds into both of those areas. So we always want to make sure when we get into the specifics of accounting and legal that we consult with an attorney on those fronts. When somebody, asks me to draw an image that is indicative of financial planning, I picture in my head Mount Everest, right? How do we get to that point, that apex of retirement? We work our whole life and then we have our retirement to enjoy. Or, some workaholics, that point at which work becomes optional. But there are a lot of small challenges we have both on the ascent and on the descent. And we need to plan for those accordingly, right? There's challenges on both sides, especially for families planning in unique circumstances. So exactly what type of strategies do I work or implement with my clients? To be holistic and comprehensive, we are starting with that financial plan. We are incorporating disability or special needs planning into that, tax planning and strategies, and estate planning. All of those work together to create a holistic approach. What we do as far as your investments and how we title accounts, how we designate beneficiaries can have huge tax consequences when it goes to your estate. So we always want to make sure all of those pieces of the puzzle are working and fitting together. Um, I was talking I was actually on the local news yesterday, and this putting on your air mask first was one of the highlights that they took out of our discussion and put on the nightly news. And it is incredibly important because we as parents, we're always putting our kids first and our kids' needs first. So I frequently will have parents come to me and say, I need to set up an ABLE account, or how do I fund my special needs trust? And my first question back to them is, first, tell me, how much are you putting in your retirement account each year? What does your retirement situation look like? Because we are not going to properly be able to care for our kids throughout their adult years if we can't adequately care for ourselves. So we want to make sure before we are doing things like ABLE accounts and 529s that we are properly funding our retirement so that everything that we are building in our financial house is in order and not going to topple because we've gotten the cart ahead of the horse. So when we talk about retirement, retirement looks very different today than it did a generation ago. So I tell the stories of Lily and Patty, and somehow my picture of Lily disappeared. But my daughter Lily was named after my grandmother Lily, and she has passed now, of course. But her retirement, she worked, she retired and passed away in the house in which she raised her kids. She did not travel a lot. She lived off of her Social Security and the savings that she had accumulated while, while she was working. Maybe she went to our sports games and things like that, but she did not really leave the area in which she was born, raised, and had her family. On the other hand, you take Patty. This is my mom. She is a few years older now than this picture, but she's 73. And last night I'm on the phone and she's talking about how her and some of her retiree friends are going to Bali in Indonesia next fall or winter. So retirement's very different for her. She travels quite a bit. Every day is Saturday. She's much more active. And much more involved in the community. So how she spends money and what she needs money for is also very different. A lot of baby boomers, when we've watched their spending in retirement, they didn't have a drop down in spending once they quit working. In a lot of cases, actually spending went up because every day is now Saturday. When we're planning for your retirement, we want to make sure we're taking into account the normal, typical challenges that retirees face. If I gave this presentation a year ago and I mentioned inflation, most people would not have batted an eye. Today, when I talk about inflation, we know what that feels like. We know what the impact of inflation on our grocery bill feels like. So we want to keep in mind that as we age, maybe our $5,000 a month in spending and living expenses, that 5,000 is not going to buy us the same thing at the age of 60 as it's going to buy us at the age of 80. So we want to make sure we're accounting for inflation. We also want to make sure we're accounting for market risk. Oops, sorry. Market risk, of course, is the fluctuation of the market. The timing or the sequencing of those returns, it has a huge impact on your retirement savings. The significant changes right around the years in which you plan to retire have the greatest impact in your overall plan. So the few years prior and the few years right after retirement are the most critical. The savings withdrawal rate, I cannot talk today, sorry. This is the amount that we consider safe to pull from your investments each year without the risk of running out of money in the long run. the rule of thumb has always been 4%. But we found after 2008, the Wall Street Journal and a lot of other investment firms did a study, and they recalibrated that to just shy of 3%. So how much we can pull and take from our retirement is a conversation we need to make sure we're having with our financial advisor, and make sure we're comfortable with the percentage that we're taking out so that we do not deplete our savings too quickly. Longevity is also a huge challenge in retirement. We all want to live as long as we possibly can. And now today with modern medicine, longevity, people are living longer. And for families that have an adult disabled child, this is going to impact us on two ways, right? Not only how long are we going to live, but how long is our child going to live and need support from us or from a trust that we leave from them. The surviving the loss of a spouse also is a financial challenge in retirement. We have what we call the widow tax, where your overall tax rate goes up because you're no longer married. You're now filing single. So we have different tax consequences there. Also, we're losing Social Security from that other person. So we might only have one stream of solid income or guaranteed income compared to what we're pulling from our investments. So we want to make sure we're planning appropriate for that, and have allowed for that increase of taxation in our expenses for the year later on. Also, just changes in tax law is an additional challenge. Right now, as we can see, the Trump initial tax laws are supposed to sunset this year, and he's trying to get them implemented to continue. So if there are changes or there are not changes in tax laws, sometimes our tax rates can go up. So we want to make sure that we are accounting for all of these different variables when we're planning for our retirement. So, as you work with a financial planner, I'm going to go back a couple slides here, and you create a financial plan that's going to look at your cash flow, your asset or your investment management, risk management, like your life insurance policies, disability insurance, long-term care, going to look at your tax efficiencies, review your distribution plans and your estate plans. All of those are going to go into building that financial plan. And that's really that first step of, this is where we're at, this is where we want to go, and how we're going to get there. The next phase that's a little different for families like ours is adding in that special needs planning. So what is special needs planning? The first point that I start families at is the estate side of it. Needing to do your own personal estate planning documents, your wills, power of attorney, revocable family trust, powers of attorney, all of that for you personally. And then setting up a special needs trust. How do we need to construct it? How will it be executed in the future, so that we have good, solid discussion of who those successor trustees are, who do we want managing it, how do we want to set it up to be most efficient and effective for our child. Then we look into the analysis of government programs, the timing of those, and the benefits that your child can receive. This is primarily Social Security and Medicaid. There are other government programs like SNAP, which is food service, or state rental assistance programs for some housing costs. There might be some other programs tied in there. Also, some counties have different programming as well. But the main two, Social Security and Medicaid, how do we protect those and make sure that it is available for our child? And how do we maximize and make sure our child is benefiting from everything that they need. My next step is developing the adult child's financial plan. We kind of create a budget for the adult of how we foresee their household or their life to be if we were not in the picture. How much would that cost them to be sustained in that situation? And then we look at that in conjunction with the parents' plan. How much of an inheritance will our child need? How much are we projecting our child to inherit from us? Do we need to establish life insurance or some other way to guarantee that the special needs trust is funded? Do we need to maybe fund it in our lifetime? Do we fund it with inheritance at death, life insurance? We want to look at how much we need in that trust, at least a ballpark. We don't have a crystal ball. And then how do we fund it? And then the last element of disability planning is when your child turns 18, what type of legal designation are we going to look for? Are we going to seek a guardianship or conservatorship? Or will we use power of attorneys to support their own decision making? It's very specific, family specific per child, but we want to make sure that we have that discussion at 18. And then again, as the parents age and the parents are becoming elderly, just to make sure that we made the right decision at 18 and that our child is properly protected if guardianship was not sought when they were 18. Okay. The fun stuff, the government programs. So what government programs are available? Like I said, the primary two are Social Security and Medicaid. So let's talk Social Security first. The first type of Social Security that we look at is Supplemental Social Security, or SSI, Supplemental Social Security Income. This amount changes each year based on inflation. It's currently $967 a month. Under the age of 18, the parent's income counts. So usually your child is not going to start receiving supplemental Social Security income, or SSI, until they're over the age of 18. You can apply for this at the age of 18 years and 1 month. So once our child receives this, then it's a matter of how are we using that money for their benefit? Do we need to leverage that money to pay for certain costs associated with their living? Another really key thing when it comes to Social Security income is that amount can be reduced by a third if the parents are supporting the child, which means you're housing them in your house. So how do you show that you are not supporting them financially so they get the full amount is through a lodging agreement where they reimburse you for the cost of their living expenses. Some people call this rent. My child pays rent of $500 a month. But really it is a reimbursement of their share of the food, the utilities, the housing, all of that. And there's differing ways that you can calculate that. There is a national average that the Social Security office utilizes. You can also do it just by calculating what, look at your budget. What is a third of those expenses, so that you can come up with a realistic amount. In most cases, it's usually above what parents are actually charging. So, if parent charges 500, another parent might charge 800. Usually the cost of living is more than that anyway. The next type of Social Security you will hear people talk about is disability income, SSDI, or the Disabled Adult Child Benefit. A lot of people whose child receives the adult disabled child benefit. They call it SSDI. It's not really. SSDI is disability based on your own personal work history. If your child has never worked, then their SSDI, they would not ever receive disability under their own record. They would receive a disabled adult child benefit based on your Social Security amount. So how does that work? Say I have a child who's 18, they apply, they start receiving supplemental Social Security income. They're chugging along with SSI 967 a month. They pay me a few $100 in reimbursement for their lodging. The rest is used for their spending, their upkeep, their life. Maybe the child works, and that might be offset. It's offset based on how much they earn, right? So you can get to a point where you no longer receive SSI if you make too much money. Then the parent retires and they start receiving Social Security. At that point, the disabled adult child can receive a benefit under the parent's Social Security. So if the parent receives $200 a month, their primary insurance amount is $2,000 a month. Sorry, I said 200. Say their primary insurance amount is $2,000 a month. The child will receive 50% of that. So $1,000 instead of the 967. In most cases, it's higher than that. You know, if you have somebody who is their benefit from Social Security is 4,000, then now the child's receiving 2,000 instead of 967. That benefit also jumps up when the parent passes away because they then receive 75% of the parent's primary insurance amount, not the 50%. So that income can be significantly higher than what the supplemental Social Security income pays. You don't get both. You get one or the other, whichever's higher. So they offset each other. So if you receive the 967, but the other one's going to be 1,000, you're going to get the one that's 1,000. Okay. Medicaid is also a huge safety net and support system for many of our children who have disabilities. Medicaid not only helps cover health insurance costs, but there is the waiver program that covers job supports, housing supports, personal care, attendant care, assistive technology, just a slew of benefits under the disability waivers, which all vary by state. A lot of times those benefits can be priceless. So both of these have a limit, a resource limit of $2,000. So if you have more than $2,000, you become unqualified for Medicaid. Medicaid also has an income restriction. So depending upon the program in which you're in, your income can kick you off of the Medicaid programs. For example, a waiver program is 3 times the SSI amount. So right now, $2,901. If your child makes more than that, then they would lose that waiver service. So we want to be very careful that we set things up to protect these services. But before we get into how are we going to protect these services, I do want to mention Medicare, because a lot of people probably looking at this slide thinking, well, why is Medicare listed on there? When you have a child who's receiving the disabled adult child benefit, 2 years and a month after they have received that DAC, the disability benefit under their parents, they will become dual enrolled for Medicare and Medicaid, which of course increases their healthcare options. So the reason that a special needs trust is so important is to protect those assets or protect those resources. Sorry. if a child has more than $2,000 in their name, they're not going to qualify for Social Security or Medicaid. And we know they're going to need more than $2,000 in the course of their lifetime. A special needs trust is a way to save money in a vehicle that will not count as a resource against them, but can supplement their needs in the future. So what is a special needs trust? It is a type of irrevocable living agreement established for the benefit of an individual with a disability, physical or mental disabilities, while at the same time allowing for the beneficiary to receive the essential needs-based government assistance. It's important so that we can protect those assets. It gets very complicated because there are multiple types of trusts. The first differentiation that we want to make between the trusts are where the money is coming from. If the money is the child's, meaning the child has earned that money, the child was given that money in their name, or the child maybe received money from a settlement for a car accident. That is their money. It goes into a first-party trust. A third-party trust is money that is not theirs. It came from a third party, such as a parent or a grandparent or an aunt, an uncle, anyone who wants to give money to the child. But instead of giving it to them in their name, they leave it in the trust's name. That is the third-party trust. So when we're looking at the two types of trust, that's the first thing to consider is whose money it is, how the money goes in. What happens to the money as it goes out of a special needs trust is also the way that we differentiate between first and third party. So at the end of my child's lifetime, say there's money left in their first party trust. It is subject to Medicaid clawback, which means Medicaid has this little calculator that goes tick, 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 tick each day, calculating how much they have spent on my child. If there is any money left in a first party trust, it is subject to clawback against that amount. The third party trust is left to the beneficiaries that you have stated. It's family money for the benefit of this individual. If the individual doesn't use it, the money goes back to the family or whomever you designate as a beneficiary. Also, while I'm talking about trust, I always like to touch upon ABLE accounts. Because ABLE account is not really, it can be used in much the same way as a trust in that it protects assets to not be counted as a resource for Social Security and Medicaid. However, it is not a replacement for a trust. ABLE accounts have a bunch of their own rules that make it so that it might not be the end-all question. So let's talk about what are ABLE accounts. ABLE account is like a 529 plan. So if you're familiar with a 529 plan, which allows you to save money income tax-free growth inside that 529 for education purposes, this is this very similar product, but the ABLE account allows you to save money for a qualified disability expense. So it has to be used for a qualified disability expense. There can only be one ABLE account per disabled person. That's a difference from an education account. The education accounts, you can have multiple. Grandparents can have one, mom and dad can have one. ABLE account, there can only be one. You can set it up with the state, or you can set it up with an investment advisor. The other way in which an ABLE account is different than a 529 is there is a limit on how much you can put in. You can put in whatever is that year's gift exception amount, which currently is $19,000. So you can put in $19,000 a year. If the disabled adult works and they earn below the poverty limit, they can put into the ABLE an additional amount equal to the poverty limit, as long as that's the amount that they've earned. So it can go over in some circumstances, but in most cases, we're looking at $19,000 a year that can go into it. It also has $100,000 cap on what the money can be used, or $100,000 cap before the money is considered an asset for Social Security and Medicaid. And that varies by state. Not all states have the same $100,000, but most states in the United States have $100,000. So because of that, it's not a replacement for estate planning, because we're going to need to have more than $100,000 in our special needs trust to care for our child. So we might need to leave, I'm just going to pick a random number, $1 million. We're not going to be able to fund that into an ABLE account in a way that would be beneficial. So it's not a replacement for, but it is another key tool in your pocket. And ABLE accounts work very well with special needs trusts, because you can move money from one to the other. And also, the ABLE account does something that the special needs trust cannot. A special needs trust is there to supplement what Social Security and Medicaid does not pay for. So we're talking about housing and food. So you cannot pay for those out of the special needs trust. You cannot pay for housing out of special needs trust. However, housing is listed as a qualified disability expense on an ABLE account. So $19,000 a year can flow from the trust into the ABLE, and from the ABLE into your housing expenses. I call that the housing loophole, but it is a key way in which we can use ABLE accounts in our overall plan. Another way that a lot of my families use ABLE accounts is for their child's retirement. So if your adult disabled child works and they have a 401k, that is considered their asset. It cannot, in conjunction with any other accounts, go over $2,000 on any given day during the month. So as money goes into a 401k, maybe an employer does an automatic contribution regardless of whether or not you contribute. That money has to then be taken out of the 401k and put somewhere else. And a lot of family members put that in the ABLE account. Or they utilize the ABLE account to save for retirement while their child's working, putting 10% of their income into the ABLE, just like we would for ourselves. So a lot of families will come to me after they have set up their special needs trust, and their main question is, okay, I have this trust, how do I fund it? There's two main ways that a trust is funded. Inheritance, when you pass away, how much money you're going to leave, or maybe it's a grandparent or aunt or uncle. The second is life insurance. So life insurance is a way to guarantee money going into the trust. Hybrid annuities are also an option where we have income that's going into the trust through an annuity. And another thing that I make sure parents have a good, solid discussion around is long-term care insurance for the parent. Why is that important? Well, that's one of the biggest draws on our nest egg. So if we plan to fund the special needs trust with the inheritance, and myself or my husband has a cognitive memory decline, or one of us has a significant illness that results in us being in the nursing home the last few years of our lives, that is a costly depletion of our estate and leaves less money to go into the trust. So we want to make sure that we have a plan for long-term care or life insurance for the parent to make sure that there is a guaranteed amount going into that special needs trust. A lot of parents, say, well, when should we buy permanent, or we have term, when should we convert it to a permanent policy? Um, and really there's a pretty big impact for the longer you wait. So as early as you can fit it into your budget, the better. Because as time goes on, premiums increase with age. We're always one doctor's appointment away from something that could cause us to be uninsurable. And also the less time that we are in the permanent policy, the less chance we have for the cash value to grow inside that policy. So when we're talking about what money is left to the trust, right? Life insurance is definitely an important factor. The second is, which assets do we leave into a special needs trust? Retirement Act, the retirement accounts are very important for families to consider, especially if you have disabled and non-disabled children. The Secure Act eliminated the stretch IRA, which allowed inherited IRAs to be stretched over the inherited beneficiary's lifetime. Now it's only 10 years. However, if the special needs trust is the beneficiary, that special needs trust can stretch it out over the disabled beneficiary's lifetime. So that has significant tax consequences. So say, for example, I have two kids. One is disabled with a special needs trust, one is not. And I want to leave my IRA 50-50. The child that is not disabled is probably, when I die, in their highest earning years. They're in their late 50s or early 60s. So they're earning their highest income. And now they have a required minimum distribution out of my retirement account of, say, an additional $50,000. That's now going to be taxed at a much higher tax rate than if I left it to my child's special needs trust, where that money is stretched out over their entire lifetime and potentially at a much lower tax rate. So we want to look at which assets and which accounts go to which beneficiary. There are also strategies we could use for gifting. I apologize. I am trying to give up caffeine and I have been yawning all day long, so I am so sorry. Strategies for gifting during your lifetime. We talked earlier about that rent or reimbursement that your child gives you each month. Sometimes parents, if they don't need that money to live off of or to support their child currently, they will invest that money inside an account with a special needs trust title so that it grows and they have gifted some money into the trust during their lifetime. Your home can also go into the trust. It can go into the trust as real estate, or it can be liquidated and the proceeds go in. Putting your home into the trust is a very big decision. The reason is you want to make sure that the house and the trustee and the person who is benefiting from it, that they can take care of it and support the house, right? If it's very important for you that your child stays in your home, but that child cannot take care of the house themselves, they cannot manage that property, there's going to be significant costs associated with that. Of having somebody to manage the property and pay the bills and do the upkeep and all of that. So having a discussion around what will happen to your family home and will it go into the trust or be liquidated is incredibly important. Also, the complexity of investments or businesses in general, if they're overly complex, having them go into the trust could make it more difficult. And of course, life insurance being the easiest one because it's guaranteed amount that we know. All of this comes together from a variety of sources, right? Your banker becomes important, your financial advisor, estate planning attorney, a CPA to do the taxes, as well as potentially a trust officer if you're hiring somebody else to administer the trust. And they all need to work together and coordinate. I'm frequently on the phone with my clients' attorneys as we're setting up trusts, and clients come back to me and say, "Here's the draft. What do you think of this?" And I'll come back and say, "Well, when we were talking, you said you wanted this to happen, but the document says that will happen. Which do you want?" So in working that out and collaborating and bouncing ideas off of the different partners in your team is very important. Preparing the next generation for care, it is vital as well, because you want to make sure you have all of this in place, right? And you have a plan of what will happen. But have you communicated that to that next person? Who will be the guardian if there is a guardian, or who will be the trustee over the trust? If your child is going to need supports, maybe they can function in society fairly well, but you haven't received guardianship. They are not incapacitated, but they're going to need support. Who is giving that? How is that family? Do you need to hire somebody to do that? And so the who is important in making sure that they have the capacity and the knowledge that they need. And then what will they need to do? And what information do you need to give them? Resources you need to provide them so that when things come up, they know where to turn. I do a couple of programs for my clients. One is a special needs resource binder, I call it, but really it's everything that anyone would ever need to know about my child if I was hit by a bus today, right? It's how to pay attendance, who her case managers are, what type of services she receives, what housing options we're looking at for in 5 years when she gets her own apartment. All of that is in there. Social Security applications, our estate documents. And also, I do a family love letter, and that's just more general. It's what happens with all of my stuff, right? Where do I bank? Who do I use? What do I want to happen? All the breadcrumbs of my life, somebody would need to know if they needed to pick up and carry on. One thing I tell my families is that this is an ongoing process. It is not a one and done. Financial planning for sure, as well as tax planning, needs to be an annual to semi-annual event. You're meeting with your advisor at least every 6 to 12 months. Depending upon your situation and your estate, that might be monthly or quarterly. Special needs planning is also something that is a pretty regular thing. There will be ebbs and flows. A lot of things happen around the age of 18. Things slow down. A lot of things happen as we move out of school and transition into adulthood. So there's different kind of peaks and valleys, but it is an ongoing process, as is tax planning. At least annually, you want to be meeting with your accountant to do some tax strategy planning and make sure you're looping in financial advisor with that. Estate planning really needs to be updated anytime there's a major change in the family or lifestyle change. Also, if there's any major changes in the laws or if you move states, things like that will trigger. But at least kind of look at it every 5 years, depending upon what's going on. And I'm going to leave you with two quotes here today before we open up to questions. While I'm like right at the 2 hours and 45 minutes, or 1 hour and 45 minutes. So we're good here. The first one in this picture is hung on my refrigerator for years is fair is not equal. As parents go through this planning process, sometimes it's very hard to know how much do I give to one child versus another, and what's going to happen to my child when I'm gone. So I always find this helpful and have it be kind of part of the dialogue and our values really as a family, right? That it's part of our script and something that we all know and uphold. The other quote I'm going to leave you with is long-term thinking and planning enhances your short-term decision making. Make sure you have a plan for your life in your hand. That includes your financial plan and your life's mission. If we know where we want to go, it's easy to set the steps of how to get there. So having that vision, holding that close to you, knowing what you want, and then following up with that frequently keeps in mind all of those little things that I need to do to get to that long-term spot. So with that, I will conclude my section and open us up for questions. I will pull up the chat here now and see what questions we have. Okay, let me find the first one here. Please use the chat feature. Okay, one question is, what if I cannot afford a financial advisor? How do I teach myself? Honestly, if my child is going to get anything when I die, all my pennies need to go to her. So there's a lot of resources out there. Places like Tash, also various ARC chapters will do a lot of seminars on these types of topics. So that's a really big way that you can educate yourself on the special needs side and what you need to do. The other side is to look at, there's a lot of books out there. David Ramsey has an approach. I like a lot of his things, not all of them. I think it's important to find a system that works for you if you're trying to budget or build wealth or whatever. Also, look at your current 401k plan. Some of them have very basic financial planning calculators built into your portal. So that can also kind of help you project and know, am I saving enough? How am I going to get there? Also, professionals don't always cost as much as you think, and you may already be paying the same amount. For example, I have clients that come to me with 401ks at a bunch of different places, and they're paying fees on all those 401ks. A lot of times you don't know what the fees that you're paying are until you really dig into the plan summaries and read them. But usually they're around 1%. If you work for a really large company, it's going to be less than that, of course. But if you work for a small to medium-sized company, your 401k, you could be paying over 1%. If you're able to move those assets to a financial advisor, you will often get the financial planning or special needs planning included in that for that same fee you're already paying. So that's one way to kind of look at how can I afford that. You might already be paying it. You just need to kind of move things around. And just, asking around and seeing what the advisors in your area charge to see if it would be a better fit for you. Any other questions that we have? It looks like there's a couple in the Q&A. For the Social Security disability income, is Social Security from both parents considered? Is there a cap? So it is considered. You can pick whichever's higher. So sometimes one parent might choose to start collecting earlier so that the child gets the adult disabled child benefit, and then the other child or the other parent starts receiving later, and then the child can bump up to that amount. There is what they call a family cap. So say dad's benefit is $4,000 and mom is receiving a spousal benefit under dad's Social Security, and the child is receiving a disabled adult child benefit off of dad, and you're both receiving it. It's subject to a cap, and that's all in on your Social Security statements. There is what they call a family max cap, family maximum. It usually comes into play if there's multiple children receiving, or when we go to the 75%, if dad passes away and mom is receiving a 75% spousal benefit and the child's receiving a $75,000 disabled adult child survivor benefit. So it could come into play there. So yes, you do want to look at that. What do you do if your ABLE account goes over $100,000 due to interest? You need to spend it. So the ABLE account, say it has 100,000, 102,000, okay? So it's only that amount that's over 100 that is counted towards the cap. So if you have 101,000 in there, that 1,000 is what's over. And you have another 500 in your checking account, you're okay because you're only 1,500 over. But if you have more than that and you go over that $200,000, you have a problem. So at that point, you need to spend the money on a qualified disability expense, or you need to move that money into a special needs trust so that it does not impact the benefits. All right, let's see. Any other questions? We got some time here. We have about 6 more minutes.
You have another question in the chat under host and panelist.
Yes, we set up a trust for our son more than 10 years ago and is of now unfunded. Is there any advantage or disadvantage to adding some funds to it now versus waiting until our son's trust receives monies from the wills of his relatives? No, there's no really advantage or disadvantage to doing that. Most people wait until the money comes in and they need the trust, and that's when they fund it. Other times people will fund it at what in the beginning. There, I would speak to your attorney, depending upon your state. Once you put money in, it becomes irrevocable. However, prior to that, there is some revocability in the trust to be able to adapt and change. So there could be an advantage if you need to adapt or change something in waiting. That would be a question I would double check with your attorney depending upon your location. All right. Any other questions? I know from prior experience years ago, it's very overwhelming, you know. A lot of times you're sitting there and you don't know what question to even ask at this point, especially if you're just starting out. Feel free to keep my information and shoot me an email if you do have any questions. I would be glad to step in and help you out in any way I can.
Okay, that was a wealth of information there. Very valuable and informative. If there aren't any other questions, then we will close out. We thank you very much for joining and hope to see you next week for our next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.